All right. So, welcome to Criminology Club. We have our first wonderful guest speaker of our fiscal year, the Honorable Judge Rosie Speedlin-Gonzalez from the county, I'm pretty sure I have that right, Court 13 here in San Antonio, Texas, for Baird County. And truly, she needs no introduction. If you've seen her on her social media, she's amazing. She serves this city with her whole heart and her whole soul. And any event that she's at, if I can go to, I go, to include her very first Reflejo court graduation, which I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit about. So I don't want to steal too much more of her thunder. All I can tell you is, as amazing as she is, her wife is even more amazing. I'm sure she won't argue with me. Her wife is an amazing inspirational speaker as well. And so I'm really honored to not only have her serving in my county and in my city, but also I consider her a friend. And she's doing this for us tonight to give us what you all voted for. You wanted a judge, we found you a judge. You wanted a court tour, and we got you a court tour. So without further ado, I'm going to go on mute, and Judge Rosie, you take it away, ma'am.
And let me ask you, will I be able to share some? I've got about a good 4 slides, and it'd be really great if I could be able to share them as I present. Is that okay? Anyone?
Absolutely, you can, and I'm going to spotlight you now as well.
Okay, fantastic. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Judge Rosie Speedlin-Gonzalez. I preside over Bexar County Court at Law number 13, which is located in San Antonio, Texas, in the heart of Texas. And I preside over one of 2 misdemeanor level courts that handle almost exclusively domestic violence cases. And so I'm going to put up a screen here for you to look at, and so you can follow along. And so Bexar County Court at Law number 13 handles specific types of cases that fall under the definition of family violence, misdemeanor family violence cases. And I'm going to explain that in just a bit. So we're talking about assault, bodily injury, married cases. You don't have to be married to be charged with that. You can be in a paramour relationship. It can be a past relationship. Assault, bodily injury, family or household member. That is an assault between family members that don't necessarily live together, or it can be between people that aren't related but do live together under the same roof. Terroristic threats. Words have meaning. You can't go around threatening to hurt people and put people in fear for their safety. That's a Class A misdemeanor. Interference with an emergency call or a 911 call. Some of us have been there, either on the receiving end. Some of us have lost our cool. We're in an argument with someone that we are involved with, and they want to get on the phone and call the cops or call a relative, somebody to help them, back them up, whatever, and you grab the phone. If it's a 911 call they're making, that's a Class A misdemeanor. You cannot interfere with someone attempting to make an emergency phone call. Unlawful restraint. Going back to, some of us may have experienced this. Either we haven't been let out, or we're not letting somebody out of a house or an apartment or out of a vehicle, and the words are said, you're not leaving until we settle this. If someone wants to leave, you better let them go. They better let you go. That's an unlawful restraint, another Class A misdemeanor. Deadly conduct. I'm going to give you an example of what deadly conduct is. A couple of years ago, we had a trial in this court. It involved a gentleman who had parented a child with an ex-girlfriend. And she had the child, didn't want anything to do with him because he had, from her testimony, exhibited some very frightening behaviors. And so he got into the habit of parking in front of her house across the street. And he would sit there in his car and rev his engine up. And she had a ring at the front of her door. And her house sat at the top of a T. One street went left to right in front of her, and he would park on the street that ended at her house. And one day he got so worked up, he accelerated the gas pedal in his vehicle. He went across the street, jumped the curb, went over her lawn, and ended up inches from her front door. That is deadly conduct. He quickly backed up, did a donut, and left. If she had come out of that door, or if that child had come out the front door, somebody could have been killed. That's an example of deadly conduct. You know it when you see it. Violation of a protective order. In many cases, in family violence and domestic violence cases, while a case is pending, special conditions of bond attach. They may include a no contact order or a no harmful or injurious contact order. In this court, I learned many years ago that you have to issue an order with specificity. If it's too broad of an order, it's not enforceable. So if I just put no contact order in my order, that's kind of a general order. What does that mean? Well, I've got a real specific no contact order. It says you are not to come within 1,000 feet. And I explain it to them. That's the length of 3 football fields, end zone to end zone. That's the length of 3 city blocks from the complaining witness. I'm going to explain why I call them a complaining witness in a few minutes. From them, their house, any car they're in or they own, their job, their place of worship, their neighbors, their coworkers, their relatives, their pets. You cannot call them. You cannot send them a text message. You cannot send them a social media app message. You cannot send them anything via U.S. Postal Service, FedEx, Amazon, any other type of courier or delivery service. And you cannot use another person to do for you what I just ordered you not to do. That's a no contact order with specificity out of my court. A no harmful or injurious contact order means that you cannot have interaction with the other person that the other person would deem harmful or injurious to them. It's not defined by the actor, it's defined by the person receiving your behavior. So those, if those are violated, those are violations of protective orders, bond conditions. Harassment has become more and more common as a family violence charge. And oftentimes when law enforcement gets to someone's house and the accused is still there, it can turn into a very dramatic situation. And oftentimes, if the person is not cooperative, when the officer is trying to arrest or detain, they get charged with resisting arrest and detainment by law enforcement. Everything in this court is a misdemeanor. Most charges are at a level of a Class A misdemeanor. The range of punishment for a Class A misdemeanor is no more than 1 year of incarceration at the Bexar County Jail. In addition to that, the court could fine you up to $4,000. And for these cases, because they are deemed family violence by definition, an individual can also lose their Second Amendment constitutional right to bear firearms and or guns for the rest of their lives. What does that mean? That means they can't purchase, possess, own, or use a firearm or a gun for the rest of their lives. They cannot live or stay anywhere, even temporarily, where guns can be found. They cannot be a driver or a passenger of any motor vehicle, whether it's a motorcycle, a boat, a truck, a car, in which guns can be found. And we don't restrict a person's right to hunt, but we do restrict how they can hunt. They cannot use a firearm or a gun to hunt with. Now, let's go into the next slide. Now, this court has jurisdiction over defendants who are 17 years of age or older because they're deemed adults for the criminal justice purpose at the age of 17. What we learned when I was running for this court and upon taking the bench is that about 85% of the defendants that come through this court are arrested under the influence of alcohol, cocaine, meth, and out of that universe, that 85 or so percent, almost 100% of them will self-disclose that they are adult survivors of childhood trauma and or addiction. Now, once a person is charged in this court, they're entitled to a bond to be set. In most other cases that are not family violence, that's enough. They meet a bond and they can be released. In other cases, other than family violence cases, the courts can issue a personal recognizance bond, a PR bond. Your promise that you're going to come back to to court just based on your word. That's not allowed in Texas under the governor's order. If you are deemed a violent offender or you've been charged with a family violence case, you must meet a cash bond. And in addition to that, we can also attach conditions of bond to those cash bonds. And they can include, like I said, a no contact order, a no harmful or injurious contact order. I can require that they report to pretrial services by phone weekly. And I tell them, if your phone breaks, if you lose it, if you don't pay the bill, you need to report in person. I can also issue a no alcohol use and no illegal drug use order while their case is pending. You've heard me. I issue a no firearms or guns order. I can put a GPS monitor on that defendant while the case is being disposed of. It can be a full GPS monitor. That means you don't get to leave your residence whatsoever for any reason. It can be a GPS partial monitor, and I, as the court, will determine where you can go and when you can go. If they work, they have to pay child support. If they want to support their family, many times I'll give them a partial monitor. And if, we have a huge homeless population in Bexar County. So in those cases, I'll put a tracking device on them. I want them to know we're tracking your movement and you need to stay away from certain areas. At all 3 levels, I waive all the fees. I waive all the fees because I don't want that to be an impediment to us being able to track them. I will consider if a person has children. If they don't, do they have visitation? I can make them by court order follow medical advice and take their doctor and follow doctor's orders. I can order them to take medication as prescribed. I can order them to cooperate with mental health services or the Center for Healthcare Services. I can order that they be supervised by the mental health special needs unit. I can refer them to the mental health court, and I can put in other conditions as well. That's all part of those special conditions of bond. I, as a court, as a judge, have to balance the defendant's right to due process. You heard me earlier refer to people as complaining witnesses. Why? Because this defendant, me, you, all have the protection under the Constitution of being deemed innocent, not until, but unless you're found guilty or you plead guilty. There's a huge difference. Until infers that you will be guilty at some point. Unless doesn't have that inference. Unless puts the burden on the state to prove your guilt before anything else can happen to you. And until you're deemed guilty of anything, you are innocent, and there are no victims. There are no victims unless you're found guilty by a jury, or unless you're found guilty by a judge, or unless you plead guilty to the alleged crime. Okay, so I always have to take into consideration the defendant's flight risk, how much money they make, their income, and other circumstances before I can set a bond. Now, you're saying, well, what happens if, like, I or somebody I know comes into Bexar County Court at Law number 13? Well, there's a bunch of different outcomes. Okay, you're charged. One outcome is the case can be dismissed. It can be an outright dismissal where the state says, you know what, we don't have enough, we're going to dismiss it. It can be dismissed after the completion of a program that is a program of first impression in the state of Texas. And it's a program that I developed along with my spouse's expertise. My wife is Dr. Stacy Speedlin-Gonzalez. She's a PhD expert on trauma and addiction, and she's 19 years sober herself. When I ran for this bench, we put my anecdotal life experience, professional experience with her experience together, and we developed the latest of the specialty courts in Bexar County. A specialty court is a court that treats substance abuse with that defendant. Bexar County has 14 specialty courts. We have an adult drug court at the misdemeanor level. We have a DWI court at the misdemeanor level. We have a felony drug court. We have a prostitution drug court. We have a veterans drug court. We have a juvenile drug court. The CPS courts have an infant drug court, a family violence drug court. We have, that's 8, and I could go on. I just got to, we have a mental health drug court. So we have, that's 9. I know we have 14. My court, Reflejo Court, is the newest one. It's been in existence for 2 years. This court offers first-time offenders of domestic violence. Remember the stats I gave you earlier. First-time offenders of domestic violence with a history of substance abuse, an opportunity to work a trauma-based, trauma-informed, intensive outpatient program for drug treatment. And if they complete the program successfully, it can take 1 to 2 years, depending on the individual's motivation to complete the program. I've had folks finish in 1 year. I've had folks take up to 2 years. But once they're completed with the program, they will graduate healed from trauma, sober, employed, and housed. And once they graduate, their case is dismissed. Not only is it dismissed, we have an agreement with the district attorney's office and the district clerk in our county that their case will be expunged at no cost to that defendant. So that's really important, because if a person is labeled a violent offender, then for the rest of their lives, regardless of them doing their time and paying their debt to society, that label sticks with them, and they will be prohibited from leasing and renting in certain types of apartments and houses. They cannot get certain types of jobs. They're prohibited from getting financial aid for college. And if they're ever in a custody dispute over children they may have parented, they can never, by law in Texas, be named a primary parent to those children. That's what a violent offender label gets you. Now, you can also get a dismissal through a deferred adjudication agreement with the state. But let me tell you something. If you are supervised at any level, pretrial, deferred, any agreement you make with the state, your case can be dismissed, but it won't be expunged. That arrest will stay on your record for the rest of your life. So you need to be very aware of that. Another outcome for people that are charged in our court is to plead. They plead out and they say, okay, I'll plead guilty for either time served or I can plead no contest, and I can plead to go into supervision. So supervision can be anything up to 2 years. And it can include a no contact order, a no harmful or injurious contact order. I can order them to do a batterer's intervention prevention program. I can order them to do anger or stress management. I can order the men to do an award-winning parenting class for men that's taught at our local children's shelter called Compadre y Compadre. MP 360 is the Mission Possible 360 curriculum that's available to now only to the people in Reflejo Court. It used to, when they had more staff, they were offering it to just everyone on probation that would want to do it, but it's no longer available to general population probationers. It's only available to folks who choose to do our Reflejo Court specialty court program. I can order them to do generic parenting classes. I can order them to complete a GED course. I can order them to complete moral recognition therapy at the reentry center. I can order them to do a TAP evaluation. That's a drug assessment, and follow all recommendations. I can order them to pay money to the Crime Stopper Fund or do community service hours. They can buy their community service off. They can get credit for AANA meetings and get 1-for-1 credit, 1 meeting, 1 hour of community service. I also give them credit if they're vaccinated for COVID. I give them 24 hours of credit for that. If they've got a booster, I get them 6 hours of credit. I'm not ordering them to do it, but if they do it, we give them credit. If they haven't done them, we give them time to do it. If they don't want to do it, they can buy their restitution off at $7.50 an hour by giving a donation to a charitable or nonprofit organization in Bexar County that runs a food pantry or a food bank. And they can do it the old-fashioned way. They can show up to a pre-approved location that's been approved by probation to go work their hours off in person. I can also issue a 0 tolerance condition of their probation. I can encourage them to finish their probation early by promising them that if they finish everything I've ordered them to do early, we will terminate them early off of probation. Oftentimes, defendants are ordered to pay restitution if they've done damage to property as a part of the crime. The DA's office can sweeten the deal by running our plea concurrent with maybe another case in another court. They can also sweeten the deal by dismissing additional cases in exchange for them pleading for the case before us. They can also make the plea a part of a felony agreement, and there's other creative ways to hold these individuals accountable. Another disposition of the case is to say, you know what, I just want my trial. Okay, we'll set you up for trial. It can be a bench trial where I'm the only one hearing the evidence, or it can be a jury trial. For misdemeanor cases, the jury is composed of 6 individuals plus 1 alternate. The jury can find you guilty or not guilty, or there could be something that happens in the trial that requires me to call a mistrial, and then we have to start all over again. So we have a team that runs this court. It includes myself. It includes a court coordinator. She's pretty much the person behind the curtain at the airport that's telling you when the flights are coming in, when the flights are taking off, if there's going to be delays, if you've been rescheduled. That's Sybil Obledo. She's my court coordinator. She's our coordinator of chaos, but keeps it very well run. She runs a tight ship, and she makes sure that we get through our cases every day and that everything is scheduled appropriately. Everything that happens in our court is recorded by a court reporter. That's Olga Gutierrez. The county clerk provides 2 clerks to help us with the administration and keeping of the records. We have a deputy. Our bailiff is Deputy Arnold Rogers. When you come into the court, whether it's virtual or in person, you'll see defense attorneys, you'll see probation officers. We have a case manager for our Reflejo Court program. That's Jackie Aguirre. Sometimes you'll see public defenders also online or in the courtroom. And maybe you'll see some therapists, some specialty court providers. So you can see all of that any day that you come on, or you could see those in person in our courtroom. Now, I do want to go over why it was so important for us to establish Reflejo Court. Bexar County has the highest number of domestic violence cases in the whole state of Texas. Where I sit right now at the courthouse and in the surrounding area up to maybe Hemisphere Park and back to UTSA downtown, over to my left and right, is the zip code known as 78205. 78205 is a notorious zip code in Texas. It is a zip code where we have the highest number of intimate partner violence homicides in the whole state. It is the most dangerous zip code for women to live in Texas. So we are a very wounded community, and we have a long history of violence being used against people. We have to start with the establishment of this community. This was a community that was populated by a number of Native American tribes. They were a peaceful community. When this community was settled by Europeans, you have to wonder who built these churches, who paved these roads, who built these historical buildings. Those buildings were built on the back, sweat, and blood of Native Americans who didn't, if they did not comply, were beaten into submission and into building these buildings for the Europeans. So here we start a long history of forcing people to do things through violence. And that has become a part of our genetic code. We have generational violence. We have generational trauma. And unless we start to do what Desmond Tutu, Bishop Tutu has told us to do, we will never get past addressing this violence. He has said in his lifetime that we have to stop going downriver and pulling the drowning people out of the water. We have to go upstream to where the river begins at the creek, at the spigot, and find out why people are falling in the first place. This is what Reflejo Court addresses. I believe in redemption. I believe that we all make mistakes, but that we should be given an opportunity to make up for those mistakes. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of these folks need punishment. Some of these folks need treatment. And some of these folks need punishment and treatment. But once they're done with all that and they've paid their debt to society, what are we to do with them? Shouldn't we allow them to join our society back and become contributing members of our society? How do we define justice? You heard what a violent offender label can do to someone. But if we afford them a way to come in and get healed and get sober and give them a hand up, not a handout, hand up to make themselves better people, then we break the cycle of violence. Every domestic violence perpetrator can create up to 10 additional victims in their lifetime. If we heal them, if we get them sober, if we get them a job and we get them housing, we don't have any more victims. They now can live their life free of that yoke of trauma. We know in this court that hurt people hurt people. But if we heal them, if we give them what they need, then they become better parents, better spouses, better brothers, better sisters, better sons and daughters. And it makes our community healthier and a safer place for all of us to live in. So that is my presentation today. I'm open to answering any questions at this time. So I think that took, wow, that took
Wonderful.
about 25 minutes. Awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to make it so people can unmute. So if you are uncomfortable coming off mute, you can put your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand so we can call on you, whatever you're more comfortable with. While I'm waiting for questions, Judge Rosie, thank you so much. That was so enlightening. As much as I know about this stuff, I still learned so much today. And I can say as a victim of domestic violence as a child and watching the cycle, you know, pre-OJ, right? It was like in the shelter on Friday and back home on Monday. And it was like, I felt like nobody cared. And I think if there were a court like yours that maybe could have helped with the violence between my stepdad and my mom, that I wouldn't have gone through that cycle, right? Because the cycle would have been broken.
Right.
So I don't know if there's other courts like yours out there, but I hope that it catches on.
Well, I can tell you that we attended a National Association of Drug Court Professionals conference a couple of weeks ago in Nashville. We thought we were a court of first impression across the country. We're not. Contemporaneously with this, about 2-3 years ago, there was a similar court that was started in Ohio and a similar court that was started in Miami. And we felt great about that because that tells us we're doing something right. We've had inquiries from courts in Alaska, New Mexico, Laredo, El Paso, Hidalgo County, Travis County, Harris County, Tarrant County. And so we had an observation last week, hoping we could get more funding now that we've been up for a couple of years. And one of their questions was if we were willing to go and present and train other jurisdictions. And we said, as long as they're paying for it, we'll show up.
All right, folks, floor is open. Anyone have any questions for Judge Rosie?
Judge, I'd just first like to say from Australia here, that's an excellent presentation, and I'll be sharing some of your key points with our domestic violence people, and thank you very much for a very enlightening talk.
We'll go where anywhere anybody will listen to us.
I'm sure you would, but coming into summer, so happy days.
I really appreciate all of your focus on healing the issues that cause people to commit these crimes. If this is something that you're comfortable talking about, was there something that you witnessed or experienced that drove you to go into this line of work?
So I can now fess up that I am a recovering social worker. I did not see violence in my household. I was not brought up with violence. My parents were very progressive. The worst thing that they did to us from our standpoint was make us sit at the dining room table quietly with the TV off, and we couldn't move. And we had to think about why we were sitting there. And then my parents would come in and lecture us, and it was a long and painful process for us. They never laid a hand on my brother and me. But I went to grad school, dropped out in the 80s, and ended up walking down the street from my university and getting a job at a residential treatment facility for adolescents. And that began my 11-year career in the social work fields. I say it that way because I am not a social worker by degree. I am a social worker by my career. I worked at a number of residential treatment facilities for children, for women. I was a child abuse investigator for a few years. I worked with the indigent under Catholic Charities. I worked with gang members in Southern San Antonio at Harlandale Independent School District. I worked with first-time offenders ages 12 to 15 who were drug users at the Mexican American Unity Council. I was an intensive supervision gang unit juvenile probation officer working with sex offenders, Spanish-speaking offenders, and felony offenders. I taught special ed. And so that was over a span of 11 years before I reapplied to go to law school at age 33 as a non-traditional law student, went to law school, graduated, became an attorney. And I'm going to tell you that toward the end of those 11 years, I remember one night in Austin, just feeling pathetic for, just having a pity party, because at that time I was working at probation during the day. In the evenings, I would go and work at a girls' residential facility. I was the overnight staff from 10 to 6 in the morning. All I had to do was do a head count and lock the doors, and the nurse would wake me up in the morning. I was done with my shift. On Saturdays, I worked at a facility for women who could take 2 children into treatment with them. During basketball season, I was a UIL basketball referee for girls' high school games. And when I had extra time, me and a team of probation officers offered unarmed security at nonprofit events, 5 jobs. And I remember for a couple of years, I couldn't break the $40,000 a year salary. And I remember sitting there like, is this as good as it gets? I've got a college degree and I can't seem to make any more money than this. And things evolved and I ended up going to law school, and guess who I ended up working for as a lawyer? The very same populations that I worked for as a social worker. And I did a lot of family law. I did a lot of juvenile law. I represented hundreds of foster kids. I did drug court representation, mental health, court representation. San Antonio has a facility on the south side, which is the state hospital. I represented a lot of people at the state hospital. By the time I got elected judge, I was the only board certified child welfare law specialist in Bexar County in South Texas. And I did it doing the same. I was a glorified social worker. I was a lawyer now. And I believe that God has a plan for us. Sometimes we don't know the answers till they're sitting, staring at us in the face. And that whole 11 plus 16 years, that 27 years of being out in the trenches with my community, I believe is what makes me the judge that I am today, and gives me the ability to see through things. Now, what I haven't told you is that in my 20s, I was a hellion. I was drinking, I was drugging. So when people come into my court and try to give me some long story about why they can't do this or that, I call them out on it. I'm like, that's not how it works. I know that because I used to do what you did. So I bring a very unique perspective and a very unique life experience to the bench that I think helps me have some street cred with these defendants, and also give me some insight as to what they can do and can't do. And having been trying to help them and those populations for so long, I now have the ability to actually order them to do it, as opposed to just making a recommendation to a court.
I think that every county needs someone who either has similar experiences as you, or who has learned from someone as well-spoken and so experienced as you. As somebody who's worked with foster care system in New York, not in the South, but I definitely think that trauma education is the key to solving many of society's issues. And
Yes.
if we start there, we can make a lot more headway. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much for everything today.
Thank
Does
you,
anyone
Ms.
else have
Kingsbury.
any questions?
I think there might be some in the chat. Let's look.
Yes, I see. we will post a lot of contact information and we
Okay.
will share within our group. Any other question? I'm scrolling and it's moving on me. Do you see anything, Reed, that I'm missing?
There was just a comment about, thank you so much for the information. Having street cred is beneficial toward your orders. And then asking for more information, which I put the contact information from your slide in there. I wanted to add to what Erica said, that your ability to truly empathize, right? Not just sympathy, but you're able to empathize. I could say I was a drug addict, but I was born that way. It wasn't by choice, right? So I never understood my mom really as to why she chose drugs, because that's what I thought it was, right? So I've had a lot of now education to try to find empathy for my mom, and knowing that drug addiction is really an illness. It might have been the choice the first time you did it, but it's not necessarily always a choice, right? But
Right.
I can't empathize like you can, because I haven't healed from something like that. So I really, really appreciate that. I would imagine most of the people who stand in your court believe that you really care about them and their restoration and their rehabilitation. And sometimes I think folks stuck in that situation, that's what they need. They really just need just like one person to care about them, even though they've done harm to another. I just think the referral court is such a great idea.
I do want to answer Brent's question, but you brought up a good point, Ree. So let me just point out a couple of things. I want y'all to look at what the general surgeon in California is doing, Dr. Burke. And she has been able to identify what childhood trauma can do in the way of damage to us as adults. Think about this. What is a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old child to do when the people they love the most and are supposed to protect them are the people abusing them, neglecting them in the most unspeakable ways? And they have anger, they develop anxiety, they get depressed, they get explosive disorders, and they don't know how to modulate those feelings as children. And so once they get older and they get into their preteens and teens, they reach for their brother's pot. They reach for their dad's beer or mom's wine, or they go next door where that guy is doing cocaine, and they start to do things that help them get away from those feelings, and they become addicts. Okay. Now, Dr. Burke talks, and so that addiction's part of the trauma, because the trauma's never addressed. That's part of how we work our program. We got to get to the root of the trauma so that we can address their addiction. Now, Dr. Burke in California has this great longitudinal study, and she talks about how those very same feelings, if they go unaddressed in children, become adults with fibromyalgia, debilitating anxiety, debilitating depression, high blood pressure, lupus, all these stress-related medical conditions, and they're all rooted in that childhood trauma. And so we really have to start looking at how we deal with that. And let's go one step further back. I remember as a child, and many of you may also, that when a woman with child came into a room, there was a whole lot of flutter about them. Put their feet up, give them something cold to drink. Don't get them upset, keep them cool, give her a fan, give her something to drink. And we're thinking about how crazy was that, right? But listen, here's the science now. We have learned in just the last few years that if a woman experiences trauma during any of her gestational period, that trauma elevates her hormonal reaction to the stress. And guess where that hormonal reaction goes? Straight into the umbilical cord, into the fetus. And when that baby is born from a mother that has experienced trauma, that baby is already born with one foot in the bucket of higher elevated hormones and overreaction to stress because they've experienced it in the fetus. We have to be aware of that. We have to be aware of that, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to change the way in which we behave. Now, Brett, I can tell you this. Stacy and I put this whole package together. I went knocking on every council person's door across the street here at City Hall, and I went knocking on every commissioner's door upstairs here at the courthouse. And I did my presentation. It sounded a lot like what you heard today. And every single one of them said to me, man, that's a great idea. It's political suicide. So give it up, Rosie. If you want to stay in office, we can't be helping violent offenders. So I turn around and tell them, good thing I'm not a politician, and good thing I'm a public servant who wants to do the best job I can do with the little time that I might be on the bench. So what Stacy and I then did was, when people tell us no, we say, watch. So we wrote a House bill. Remember that, Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. Well, we wrote a bill, and we got ourselves a state representative, Representative Roland Gutierrez, to sponsor it in the House chamber at the Capitol. And we got ourselves a state senator, Senator Jose Menendez, to sponsor it in the Senate chamber at the Capitol. It got voted out unanimously out of the House. It went to the Senate, and it got voted out unanimously out of the Senate. And then it sat on Governor Greg Abbott's desk for a couple of months. I'm going to give credit for where credit is due. He signed that bill into law and created Reflejo Court in county court at law number 13. But I bet you if he knew that 2 lesbians wrote that bill, he might not have signed it. That's, it's a little thing I like to joke about. But so we got it up and running, and the county judge who I had knocked on the door on and was one of those people who said to me, it's political suicide, was actually the first guy who stepped up to give us some of our seed money. He gave us $100,000 and said, see what you can do with that. It took us about a year to get everybody at the table after the bill got signed into law. We operate on a budget. We probably have the smallest budget of all the county, all the specialty courts in the county, of about $275,000 a year. That's for staff, that's for probation, that's for treatment beds, everything. And so now that we've been up for a couple of years, we're hoping that there's other funding sources that will recognize us, and we will be able to grow. We've had 3 graduations. Ree was at one of them. Out of all our graduates, we've only graduated 10 people. We graduated 4 our first graduation, and then we had, our second graduation was right after Christmas. And this is something to watch for. Whenever we have a graduation right after the holidays, people fall off the graduation list because they relapse. They don't do what they're supposed to do as part of their program. And it requires long-term sobriety and compliance. So our second graduation went from 4 to 1. And then our last graduation had 5. So we have 10. We're wanting to grow it. Of all our graduates, not a single person has reoffended. It works.
That's amazing. Even just one makes it worth it, right? All right, one question here in the chat is, I'm not sure if you just addressed this, your biggest challenge in implementing the program?
Yeah, that was Brent. I think that
was that one?
Brent, yeah.
Okay, we have another one. Does Texas have de facto parent rights? And what would you tell someone who is a de facto parent who wants to take them away from an abusive situation?
Texas has some requirements, and it's not de facto. There's always got to be a hearing to determine if the person who has had the child for a minimum of 6 months in their sole possession should be the person raising the child, because it is in the best interest of that child. And the best interest standard has to be looked at from at least 9 minimum factors. It's a balancing test, and the default is that biological parents are always what's in the best interest of raising their own children unless proven otherwise. And so there is not that de facto. You have to work to try and do that. If you feel that a child is being harmed in their environment, then you have the duty to report it to Child Protective Services and law enforcement and let them take the wheel from that point on.
I actually had a question. What if someone shares with you that they know of a child or highly suspect of a child is being abused that lives in another state? Is there, I know there's like a national domestic violence line, but is there a better route?
You know,
get help?
there's so many differences between the states as to how they deal with those types of issues. And I would say to them, you know, call that state law enforcement, call their, you know, state troopers, and they'll guide you from there. You know, you have to have very specific information before you make a call like that. You know, where does the child live? What is the child's name and age? Who are the parents? What kind of abuse are you talking about? How long ago was this abuse before you call something like that in?
Unless
All
anybody
right.
else has a question. Sorry, Ree, I didn't mean to cut you off. Our club is based off of people who are either studying criminology, have a desire to work in criminal justice in some sort, or just share an interest in it. Is there anything that you would recommend we do our part, whether it's volunteer opportunities or things to be keeping an eye on as far as educating ourselves, just to make the criminal justice system in general a more effective and better place?
Well, you know, it starts with, how do you define the criminal justice system and what kind of results do you want from the criminal justice system? You know, your club, I'm sure, is as diverse as any other club. You're going to have club members that believe in, you know, law and punishment, you know, punitive measures, and that's the only way to correct behavior. Then you're going to have the bleeding hearts, right, that say we can try and fix them, and it's cheaper to fix them than to incarcerate them, which is actually a fact. And then you have people that, you know, they're sort of like me. I'm a little bit of that, you know, 6 of this, half dozen of the other. And because I've seen so much, and you know, when I was at Child Protective Services, we were trained to assess a situation within 30 minutes. And so I tend to, you know, at the end of 30 minutes, have my opinion of, and so I have to buffer myself with people that can, you know, maybe flush that out a little bit more. And as a judge, I have to withhold that judgment until I hear all the evidence, right? Until I know as much as I can know before I'm pushed to make a decision. So, you know, and there's so many different levels and approaches to criminal justice. You know, criminal justice for people of color, criminal justice for women as opposed to men, criminal justice between adults and children, the criminal justice system that varies from not only state to state, but country to country. For all the faults that we see in our country every day, I truly believe that we still have the best criminal justice system in the whole world, where people are deemed innocent unless proven guilty, and where people are afforded due process. You know, Ms. Greiner, look at what happened to her in Russia. You know, that would not have happened here in the United States. She would have had her full due process exercised. There's other countries where folks don't have that. And so despite all our differences and all the vitriol, and people attacking each other on, you know, social media now, I still believe that 80% of us are in the middle, and we have a lot more in common than we have not in common. And, you know, that media doesn't do us any favors by focusing on the two extremes, because that's what gets their ratings up. And I think we can do a lot more together than apart, and making this world a better place for our kids than what it was when we came into it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Judge, what was the name of the legislation that you that you all got passed here?
It was
in
House
Texas?
Bill 3529, and it was passed during the Texas 2019 legislative session.
All right, so you said House Bill 3529 passed in 2019, correct?
Yeah, right, correct.
All right, so lots more praises and thank yous in the chat. Any other questions, folks? We're wrapping up on our hour, so we want to give you a chance to ask Judge Rosie any other questions you have about Texas or the law in general. Now's your chance. I want to take the time too, while I'm waiting, to just thank you again. What they don't know, because I wasn't sure if it was going to happen. So all listening, I was able to go and get that courthouse tour that you all had voted on Facebook that you wanted. I did that today. So poor Judge Rosie has been at work since I don't know what time this morning. She hung around for me to do the tour, and then she hung around even longer to do this for us live. So just extra special thanks. I know that you are a servant, you have a servant's heart, and that's why you pretty much always say yes, unless there's a legitimate reason to say no.
Yeah, I got to be in the hospital or knocked out. You know? Exactly.
Like you have to be like pretty hurt to say no, I know, or have other plans. And I really appreciate that, because a lot of judges act like they're entitled to be there. And it's like, but you kind of work for the people. Like, that's kind of what you do. And not that you have to say yes to everything, but it's nice that you took the time to do this for our, small little club. We're spread around the world. Erica's literally in Korea right now, and Bradley's in Australia, as you already saw. I want to ask folks, if you're able and willing to turn on your cameras, because I do like to take a picture each time we host a meeting to celebrate our club. And also, of course, we want to celebrate our wonderful Judge Rosie while she's here. And then we will let her go if there's no other questions. And then I'll give you kind of our final announcements and let you know when we're going to show this lovely tour.
I'm going to do a shameless plug. I'm on the ballot to get reelected in November, on November the 8th. So if any of you have any contacts in San Antonio or in Bexar County, Texas, I'd appreciate a shout out for me and get them to go out and vote for me.
Shameless. Nope. That was you're right there. Go for it.
Well, right. As criminologists, you have to always be very conscious of the fact that in order to affect the change that you want, you have to have the right leadership in place. So you have to elect like-minded people who believe in the same things that you believe in.
That's correct. And you have to vote. You have to do your research, and you have to vote, and you have to have a voice.
Absolutely.
You're absolutely right.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, you got about 2 more seconds to turn on your camera if you're gonna. If you're not gonna, that's okay. Check your teeth, fix your hair, do whatever you're gonna do. I'm gonna say 3, 2, 1, and then I'm gonna snap the shot. So don't blink on 1, okay? Blink on 2. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1, cheese. All right, and just because I love you, we will do 1 more photo. Ready? 3, 2, 1, cheese. All right, thanks for playing along, friends. Thank you so much, Judge Rosie. Any final words?
Y'all have a good night, and let me know if you have any other questions. We can always bring other judges on as well. I got friends and they owe me favors.
I love it.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Again, so
all right,
much
y'all have a
for your
good
time.
night.
Have a good night, Judge.
Bye-bye.
All right, y'all, I'm gonna stop the recording.